You can feel the tension in the air when you imagine Ayesha Curry at this exact moment. Salty tears trace warm paths down her soft cheeks, while her hands tremble uncontrollably, holding an envelope yellowed by time. An envelope that carries secrets capable of destroying everything she believes she knows. The rough paper seems fragile between her cold fingers, as if it could disintegrate at the slightest touch, revealing truths that perhaps would have been better never discovered. She breathes deeply, her chest rising and falling in irregular waves, each breath carrying the weight of 15 years of marriage that may be about to change forever. But for you to fully understand how we arrived at this moment of rupture, you need to dive with me 10 hours into the past. It was a morning that began like all others in the Curry mansion in Atherton, California. But you will soon discover that some mornings carry the power to transform entire lives. The intoxicating aroma of artisanal Ethiopian coffee danced through the air of the gourmet kitchen, each olfactory note mixing sensually with the sweet and comforting smell of blueberry pancakes that crackled in the hot pan. You can almost feel the steam rising from the golden batter, can't you? Ayesha moved through the kitchen with that hypnotic gracefulness of someone who had transformed cooking into pure art, each movement fluid and purposeful, like a dance choreographed by perfection. The golden light of the California morning through the panoramic windows like liquid honey, creating a mosaic of dancing shadows on the cold Carrara marble of the countertop. And you can perceive that this image of perfection is about to shatter. "Mom, why are you messing with those old yellowed papers?" Riley's melodious voice cut through the morning air, her legs swinging in the air like small, innocent pendulums while she savored strawberries cut in star shapes, not imagining that her simple question had just planted the first seed of a devastating discovery. Ayesha smiled, that warm and authentic smile that had conquered millions of hearts on social media. "I'm organizing Daddy's office, sweetheart. Sometimes we keep things we don't even remember we have." The words came out naturally, but you can perceive how each syllable carried a prophetic weight that she still didn't understand. Outside, the rhythmic and metallic sound of weights hitting echoed from the private gym built in the backyard. Steph was training, with that hypnotic intensity as always, even in the off-season. Each repetition was precise, controlled, a muscular symphony of dedication that Ayesha knew by heart after 15 years of conjugal intimacy. The sound penetrated through the walls like a constant drum. But nothing could prepare her for what was to come. It was when Steph entered the kitchen to get water, his magnetic presence filling the space as it always did, that he said something that made Ayesha's world tremble, imperceptibly. The sweat created small crystalline drops that shone on his dark skin like liquid diamonds, and when his words cut through the perfumed air of the morning, you can feel how they carried a hidden, dangerous weight. "Some secrets from the past should remain buried," he said, his deep voice reverberating through the kitchen with such forced casualness that even you can perceive the tension hidden behind each syllable. It was like when someone desperately tries to sound unconcerned about something that haunts them every night. Ayesha stopped stirring the coffee instantly. You can visualize the silver spoon suspended in the air, trembling slightly, as if time had frozen for a fraction of a second. "We don't have secrets, love." Her words came out charged with the absolute confidence of someone who faithfully believes what they say, but did you notice that indefinable flash that passed through her eyes? Just a flash, like a dark cloud quickly passing under the golden sun of the morning. Steph kissed her forehead tenderly, that automatic gesture of intimacy built over 15 years of marriage. You're right, as always. But can you perceive how his fingers lingered longer than necessary on her shoulder? A subtle, desperate anchor, as if he were clinging to something he knew was about to slip through his fingers. Cannon and Ryan ran through the kitchen chasing Cash, the family's golden retriever, creating a cheerful cacophony of laughter and barking. The normalcy of the morning enveloped them like a soft blanket. Fragrant coffee, happy children, loving husband, dream house bathed in California's golden light. After breakfast, with Steph back to his obsessive training ritual, and the children entertained with educational games that filled the house with innocent laughter, Ayesha slowly climbed to the office on the second floor. Each step of the oak staircase echoed under her bare feet, a rhythm you can almost hear, can't you? The task seemed absurdly simple. Reorganize the furniture for the arrival of the new reading sofa she had ordered. But you can already sense that some simple tasks carry the power to explode our reality into 1,000 pieces. The office was Steph's sacred sanctuary, a masculine temple where walls were lined with golden trophies that capture light, framed jerseys that tell stories of glory, and photos of historic moments that immortalized his greatness. In the center of the main wall, like an altar, a framed photo of young Steph at Davidson College dominated the space. That intense gaze, fixed on something beyond the camera, had always transmitted pure determination to Ayesha. But today, can you perceive how something changed in that image? Today, for some reason she couldn't explain, there was something different in those young eyes, something that seemed more fragile, more desperate. She began moving books from the custom-built shelf, feeling the familiar weight of each volume between her fingers. Biographies of great leaders whose pages Steph had devoured, books about champions' mindset that he quoted in interviews, some literature classics that accompanied him on long flights and lonely hotel nights. It was when her fingers slipped over something completely unexpected, something that shouldn't be there. You can feel your breathing accelerate along with Ayesha's when she discovered a dark wooden box, small but heavy as a heart full of secrets, hidden behind the third row of books, as if someone had deliberately tried to erase it from existence. The wood exhaled the soft scent of aged cedar, its smooth surface polished by time, edges softened by years of silent waiting. Ayesha held it reverently, feeling how its velvety texture contrasted with the sudden coldness that took over her sweaty palms. What she found inside that cursed box would change her perspective on 15 years of marriage forever. Imagine yourself opening that box with her, a treasure of memories revealing themselves like ghosts from the past, yellowed fan letters whose edges crumbled at touch, newspaper clippings from his first NBA seasons that exhaled the characteristic smell of aged paper, faded Polaroid photos of intimate moments that seemed to have been taken in another life. Steph holding newborn Riley with trembling hands of a first-time father, herself pregnant and radiant, smiling in a modest apartment that barely resembled the palace where they lived now. But it was the envelope at the Diffuse bottom of the box that made Ayesha's world literally crumble. Can you feel your breathing stop along with hers? Aged cream paper, sealed with red wax that had cracked with time like old wounds. Steph's handwriting, those slanted letters she would recognize even with her eyes closed, even in dreams, formed words that made her heart accelerate until it almost exploded. For Ayesha, open only if... The rest was blurred, stained, as if salty tears had fallen on the still fresh ink years ago, carrying with them secrets that Steph had cried to hide. Ayesha instinctively turned her wedding ring that hypnotic movement her body executed whenever something left her genuinely in panic. The diamond caught the morning light and shot small rainbows that danced across the wall like luminous warnings, each reflection pulsing to the rhythm of her uncontrolled heart. At that exact moment, as if the universe itself conspired to maximize her agony, Steph's powerful voice cut through the deadly silence of the office like a blade. "Ayesha, where are you, baby?" Can you feel the pure panic taking over her? Without thinking, moved by a primitive instinct of self-preservation, she hid the envelope in the desk drawer with frantic movements, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Her heart beat so loud, so violent, that she was absolutely certain Steph could hear it echoing through the mansion's corridors, betraying her terrible discovery. The box quickly returned to its hiding place behind the books, but the envelope remained in the drawer like a radioactive secret, burning her conscience from the inside out. Some secrets from the past should remain buried. Steph's prophetic words echoed in her mind like a cursed mantra as she descended the oak staircase, each step creaking under her feet like laments of ancient wood. She tried desperately to compose the most natural expression possible, but can you perceive how her hands still trembled slightly? How her lips refused to form a convincing smile? For the first time in 15 years of marriage, 15 years of absolute complicity, total intimacy, blind trust, Ayesha Curry asked herself a question that made her world tremble at its foundations. Did she really know the man with whom she shared not only the bed, but the soul? And that cursed envelope in the drawer seemed to pulse like a secret heart buried alive, whispering dark promises of truths that could destroy everything she considered sacred. Each second that passed, you can feel how it burned stronger, demanding to be opened, demanding to reveal the secrets that Steph had cried to hide. What could be written on those yellowed pages? What truth was so devastating that it needed to remain buried forever? And why, for the first time in her life, did Ayesha feel that her own home had become a prison of golden lies? Can you physically feel Ayesha's heart still exploding against her ribs when Steph appeared in the kitchen doorway like a dangerous apparition? His athletic body filled the space with that magnetic and predatory presence that made millions of fans sigh, each defined muscle glistening with the salty sweat from training. But there was something different in his eyes when he studied her, something dark, investigative, that made her blood instantly freeze in her veins. Can you almost feel that penetrating gaze piercing through her skin? "Everything okay, baby?" The question came out charged with genuine concern that dangerously contrasted with the radioactive secret pulsing in the office drawer. Can you perceive how that simple question transformed into a deadly trap? How each syllable carried the weight of an investigation? For the first time in 15 years of sacred marriage, Ayesha Curry was about to lie to the man who knew every beat of her heart. "Of course," she responded. But can you hear how her voice came out too high, brittle, betraying every fiber of her being? "Just organizing your old things." Each word weighed like molten lead on her tongue, burning her throat with the bitter taste of the first real lie of her marriage. Can you feel how she desperately fought to maintain control? Each facial muscle tense to not crumble? Steph approached like a smooth predator, his golden eyes scanning her face with the surgical precision of someone who knows every micro-expression, every involuntary tremor, every sign of lie from his wife. For an absolutely terrible moment, Ayesha was absolutely certain he had discovered everything, that he could smell the secret emanating from her skin like guilty perfume. But then he simply kissed her forehead, that routine gesture that now carried the crushing weight of 15 years of trust she had just betrayed. "You seem distant," he murmured against her warm skin, his breath creating shivers that descended her spine like phantom fingers. "Are you absolutely sure everything is okay?" And it was in that devastating moment that something irreversibly shattered inside Ayesha. Can you physically feel how a gigantic emotional dam violently burst? Because while looking directly into the almond eyes of the man she considered knowing better than her own soul, a brutal torrent of memories began to unfold like an avalanche of revelations. Memories she had locked in armored compartments of her mind, but which now exploded like nuclear time bombs forgotten for decades. You are about to dive with me into a hallucinatory temporal journey. A journey that will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and the dark secrets that the most perfect couples hide in the shadows of their golden lives. Imagine yourself being instantly transported to those narrow and claustrophobic corridors of that modest apartment in Oakland, where dreams were still fragile as crystal, and the future hovered over them like a storm cloud. Can you feel the smell? The apartment where everything began, and where almost everything ended forever. The thin walls could barely contain the fears that echoed every night like muffled screams, and you can almost physically feel the dense smell of anxiety that impregnated each room like toxic perfume, can't you? Ayesha was 6 months pregnant with Riley, her round belly growing like a promise of life, while her husband's hope withered like a flower without water. Can you visualize that young and radiant woman instinctively touching her belly in moments of tension? Steph came home after each game with that devastated look she learned to recognize and fear, the wild look of a man who was losing the most important battle of his existence. Can you see through his eyes? Each missed shot was a direct stab to his self-esteem. Each venomous criticism from the media was slow acid spreading through his veins, corroding him from the inside out. "What if it doesn't work out, Ayesha?" Steph whispered during infinite sleepless nights, his voice breaking like shattered glass in the suffocating darkness of the tiny room. "What if I'm not good enough? What if all this is just a pathetic dream of a man who deluded himself?" Can you physically feel the raw and bleeding pain in these words? How each syllable was torn from his chest like confessions of a dying man? Ayesha slowly turned in bed, her heavy belly making each movement difficult, and held the tear-wet face of the man she loved between her small hands, warm as embers. "We're going to make it, Steve. I believe in you, even when you can't believe in yourself." Can you feel how these words were all that kept them alive? How they were the only thread that prevented Steph from completely shattering? But what she didn't know, what you're about to discover, and which will make your blood freeze, is that Steph was much closer to the deadly abyss than she ever dared imagine in her worst nightmares. During those torturous nights of insomnia that seemed to last eternities, when Ayesha finally fell asleep exhausted by the weight of pregnancy and tension, Steph would rise like a tormented ghost and walk barefoot to the small kitchen table that creaked under any weight. There, under the flickering light of a cheap lamp that blinked like a dying heart, he wrote obsessively. Can you almost hear the hypnotic sound of the pen scratching the rough paper? Each word being literally torn from his chest, like bloody confessions of a man on the brink of madness? "My dear Ayesha." The first words were always the same, written with handwriting that trembled between despair and unconditional love. Can you feel the emotional weight of each letter he engraved on paper? The weeks turned into months, and the 2014 playoffs approached like a death sentence. Steph knew, can you perceive this now, that this would be his last chance. Failing would mean not only the end of his dreams, but the collapse of everything he had promised to the pregnant woman sleeping trustingly in his bed. The night before the decisive game against the Los Angeles Clippers was when everything changed forever. Ayesha had fallen asleep early, exhausted by pregnancy and the tensions of recent months. Steph stayed awake in the living room, staring at statistics that confirmed his worst fears. He was failing when he most needed to be strong. Media criticism echoed in his head like an infernal chorus. Curry doesn't have what it takes for big moments. Wasted talent. Another promising young man who couldn't deliver in decisive moments. It was then that he wrote the letter. That cursed letter that Ayesha had found hours ago and which now burned like radioactive acid in her drawer. Can you visualize Steph sitting at that tiny kitchen table, salty tears falling freely like rain of pain, while his hand trembled uncontrollably over the paper? Each word was a brutal confession of his deepest and most secret failures, each sentence a desperate plea for forgiveness, for not being the man she deserved, for not being the hero his daughter would need. Can you feel how he wrote about the night terrors that haunted him? About the lacerating sensation of disappointing not only millions of fans, but mainly the angelic woman who had sacrificed her own nascent culinary dreams to support him unconditionally? If you are reading this, he wrote with salty tears, staining the still fresh ink like blood, it means I had to leave like a coward. Or I failed so pathetically that I can no longer look you in the eyes without shattering inside. Can you feel the pure agony in this confession? The letter revealed a Steph that Ayesha had never known, not even in her wildest dreams. Vulnerable to the bone marrow, terrified by the possibility of not being enough for anything or anyone, seriously considering abandoning basketball forever if he failed one more time. Can you feel the raw and bleeding pain in these confessions written with emotional blood? He had meticulously planned every detail of his escape. If they lost that series, he would leave Oakland like a fugitive, leave the NBA like a failure, leave everything. Because he faithfully believed that true love sometimes meant protecting those we love from our own inadequacies and monstrous failures. When he finished pouring his soul into ink and tears, Steph sealed the letter with blood-red wax, using a romantic candle that Ayesha had hopefully bought for intimate dinners, and hid it in the wooden box, along with other broken fragments of a life that might be about to implode like a nuclear bomb. In that cold and silent dawn, he carefully lay down beside his pregnant wife and whispered in the dark like a desperate prayer, "Promise you'll always remember that I loved you more than life itself, even if I fail at absolutely everything else that matters." Ayesha murmured something asleep and snuggled against him as she always did, having no idea she was embracing a man who planned to disappear from the face of the earth if the next day's game didn't go exactly as he dreamed. But you know how this story ended, don't you? Can you feel the devastating irony of this revelation? Steph not only won that game, he dominated it like a possessed basketball god. It was the explosive beginning of the epic transformation that would lead him to become a world legend. And the letter? The letter remained buried alive, guarding radioactive secrets of a man who almost didn't exist. Of an alternative Steph Curry who almost gave up on the exact eve of becoming the supernatural phenomenon that the entire world venerates today. Now, do you fully understand why that cursed envelope burns in Ayesha's hands like liquid fire from hell? Why each word engraved on those yellowed pages has the nuclear power to completely rewrite the love story she believed she knew by heart? Why her entire reality is about to be demolished and reconstructed? The man she married, the man she adored like a god, was much more fragile, much more human, much more real and terrifying than she ever imagined in 15 years of intimate coexistence. And now, with that envelope pulsing like a diabolic heart in her drawer, Ayesha is about to discover truths that can either destroy their marriage or make it infinitely deeper and more true. The question that burns in her chest like fire is, will she have enough courage to open that envelope and face the Steph she never knew? The silence in the Curry mansion was so dense you can almost touch it with your fingers, can't you? Each tick-tock of the Swiss clock in the hallway echoed like heartbeats of a condemned man awaiting execution. Ayesha finally found herself alone with her destiny. And can you physically feel how each second stretched like refined torture? The children were at school, absorbed in their innocence. Steph had left for another obsessive training session that now gained a completely dark meaning. And she was there, alone with the radioactive secret that pulsed in the drawer like a nuclear bomb waiting to vaporize her reality into atoms of pain. Her hands trembled like leaves in an apocalyptic gale when she climbed the oak stairs, each step groaning under her bare feet like laments of ancestral wood. Can you feel how her heart explodes against her ribs with such violence that she was absolutely certain the sound echoed through the mansion's empty corridors? The office door seemed like a dimensional passage, a portal to a parallel universe where everything she believed she knew about her sacred marriage was about to be demolished with emotional dynamite and reconstructed with the bloody debris of naked truth. The drawer creaked when she opened it, as if the furniture itself protested against the profanation that was to come. Can you hear that sharp sound piercing the silence? There it was, the cursed envelope that had transformed a golden morning of California perfection into a vertiginous descent into the hell of soul-destroying discoveries. Can you visualize her hands trembling when she held it, like someone holding a bomb about to explode? The paper seemed to pulse between her cold fingers as if it had its own life, heated by the radioactive secrets it had guarded for an entire decade of silent lies. For an absolutely terrible moment, Ayesha hesitated like a condemned woman before the executioner. Can you physically feel the crushing weight of this decision that would change everything forever? A primitive part of her soul screamed desperately for her to burn that letter without reading it, to preserve the golden illusion of perfection she had built brick by brick over 15 years. But there was something more powerful pulsing in her veins like poison. A primitive, animalistic need to know the naked and raw truth, no matter how many pieces her heart shattered in the process. She broke the red wax seal with fingers that trembled like leaves in an apocalyptic storm. Can you hear the dry sound of the wax breaking? Like glass shattering, releasing demons that had been trapped for years? My dear Ayesha. Steph's ghostly voice exploded in her mind, as if he were whispering poison directly against her ear. Can you physically hear the bleeding desperation in these first words? Each letter was engraved with handwriting that oscillated violently between fragile hope and total despair, as if he had poured blood tears over each cursed syllable he wrote. If you are reading this, it's because I failed as a man, as a husband, as a future father, as absolutely everything I promised to be for you when I swore to love you forever. The words hit Ayesha like incendiary daggers straight to the stomach. Can you feel how she needed to desperately grab the desk to not collapse like a rag doll? Can you feel her weak legs failing under the weight of revelation? Each sentence revealed a Steph she had never known, not even in her darkest and most terrifying nightmares. I need to confess crimes of the heart that I have hidden like a coward because I didn't want you to see the pathetic failure I really am behind this mask of false confidence. And then began the nuclear revelations that would make her world implode in flames. The gambling, Ayesha. I gambled like a desperate addict. Not much money, but I bet on games when I was so desperate. I needed to feel I still had some pathetic control over my life that was collapsing. Each dollar lost burned like acid, more irrefutable proof that I am a man, too weak, too broken to take care of our family as I promised at the altar. Can you feel how these words pierced her heart like explosive bullets of betrayal? Gambling. Steph had gambled like an addict and never said a single word. The man who preached iron discipline and absolute control had lost himself in secret and dark vices during his most desperate moments, like an addict hiding scars in the dark. The letter continued, each revelation more devastating than the previous, like blades, cutting deeper. I stay awake every night in agony, watching your belly grow like a promise of life, and wondering what kind of monstrous father I can be. When I can barely hit baskets I used to make with my eyes closed when I was just a dreaming boy. Our daughter deserves a real hero, Ayesha. She deserves a man who doesn't shatter with each missed shot, each venomous media criticism, each cold look of disappointment from coaches who have already given up on me. Tears began to explode from Ayesha's eyes like salty cascades of pure revelation. Can you physically feel the raw and bleeding pain in these confessions? Steph had carried alone, like Atlas, the crushing weight of feeling inadequate as a future father, terrified to the bones by the possibility of disappointing the daughter who hadn't even breathed yet. But there was more. There was always more poison to be poured. And you, my love, my sacrificed angel, you buried your culinary dreams alive for me. You abandoned gastronomy classes that made your eyes shine, canceled sacred plans to open your own restaurant where you would be the queen you deserve to be, all to support me while I fail spectacularly at reciprocating your blind faith. You deserve a man who transforms your sacrifices into glorious victories, not into public shames that stain newspapers. Can you imagine how these words shattered something fundamental and sacred inside her? How each syllable was a confession of guilt so deep it made Steph consider destroying himself to free her? The guilt he carried for Ayesha, having paused her nascent career, was so intense, so venomous, that he considered abandoning everything just to free her from a future tied to a failure. The letter revealed layers and more layers of bleeding self-deprecation. If you are reading this, it probably means I couldn't win today. It means I failed at the last pathetic chance basketball gave me to prove I'm not just another talent wasted by my own weakness. And if I fail at this, how can I fail as a husband and father too? How can I drag you and our daughter to the abyss of my mediocrity? Ayesha's hands trembled with such violence she could barely hold the paper that burned like liquid fire between her fingers. Can you feel how her entire reality was being rewritten word by word, as if each letter were a bomb exploding her perception? The man she considered invincible, an unbreakable warrior made of muscles and determination, had spent years carrying, insecurities so deep and infected that he considered disappearing like a ghost to protect her from his own perceived inadequacy. If something happens to me, if I decide to leave like a coward, to not drag you and our angelic daughter to the infernal abyss of my mediocrity and failures, I want you to know that each moment by your side was the only place in the universe where I felt truly alive. You transformed a scared and broken boy into something resembling a man, even if that man isn't strong enough to deserve being in the same galaxy as your golden dreams. The letter ended with words that made Isha's heart shatter into 1,000 cutting fragments. I love you with every fiber of my being, too much to allow you to live forever in the cold shadow of my monstrous failures. If I leave, find someone who deserves the angel you are, someone who transforms your sacrifices into eternal glories, not into daily nightmares. Forgive me for not being the man you deserved from the first kiss. But thank you for loving me, as if I were worthy of this blessing. Forever your devoted slave, Steph. Isha let the letter fall from her hands like a dead leaf, each word echoing in her mind like echoes of a tortured soul being flayed alive. Can you feel how she finally understood the devastating irony? The man she had married, the man who became a world legend adored by millions, had spent years considering himself unworthy, even to breathe the same air as her. Each subsequent victory had been built on foundations of fear and self-doubt that she had never suspected even in dreams. It was in that apocalyptic moment of total revelation that she heard the sound that made her blood freeze. The key turning in the front door lock, like a death sentence. Steph was coming home. The final confrontation had arrived. His steps echoed through the hallway like drum beats executing a condemned man, each sound approaching the office where she sat with the radioactive debris of 15 years, of illusions scattered around her like shards of bloody glass. Can you feel the pure and raw panic taking over her like poison? In seconds that seemed like eternities, she would have to look directly into the almond eyes of the man she loved, more than life, and pretend she hadn't discovered the darkest and bloodiest secrets of his soul. "Isha, where are you, baby?" His voice echoed through the mansion like a familiar ghost, charged with a tenderness that now gained completely new layers of devastating meaning. Can you imagine how each familiar word sounded different now that she knew the nuclear truth? How each syllable carried the weight of years of bloody secrets? The steps stopped at the office door like an executioner reaching the final destination. Isha turned slowly, as in slow motion, tears still bathing her cheeks in salty rivers of revelation, the confession letter in her trembling hands like evidence of crimes of the heart. Her eyes met his, and for an eternal moment that lasted 1,000 years, time stopped completely, suspended in the air like a bomb about to explode. Steph stopped at the door like a biblical salt statue, his golden eyes fixing first on the open envelope like a wound, then on the devastated expression on his wife's face, then on the letter she held like evidence of soul betrayals. "You found it," he whispered, his voice breaking like shattered crystal. It wasn't a question. It was total surrender, a final confession, a man turning himself into the firing squad. And in that nuclear moment, can you physically feel how 15 years of marriage reached a definitive crossroads of destiny? How everything they had built together was suspended in the air like smoke, waiting to be destroyed forever, or transformed into something infinitely more real, deeper, more true than any golden fantasy. The truth was finally free from its prison of paper and red wax. Now they would have to decide what to do with this wild and dangerous creature that had been released between them. "You found it." The words hovered in the air between them like radioactive smoke from a nuclear bomb that had just vaporized 15 years of golden lies. Can you physically feel how each syllable carried the crushing weight of a soul being stripped of its most sacred masks? Steph stood there at the office door like a defeated gladiator, his athletic body trembling like a leaf in an apocalyptic hurricane, his golden eyes fixed on the letter Ayesha held like bloody evidence of crimes against the heart. For an eternal moment that lasted 1,000 years of suspended agony, neither dared to breathe. Can you feel the electric tension crackling in the air between them like lightning about to explode? It was as if all oxygen had been violently sucked from the room by invisible demons, leaving only the suffocating weight of naked truth pulsing between their exposed souls like open wounds. "Steph," Ayesha's voice exploded like a broken whisper, charged. With pain so raw and bleeding, you can feel every fiber of her being shattering like ground glass. "Why did you never tell me? Why did you carry all this alone like a condemned man marching to the gallows?" He entered the office, like a man walking barefoot over glass shards toward his own funeral, each step echoing with the crushing weight of secrets that had finally been torn from their dark prison, like released demons. Can you visualize how his broad shoulders seemed to carry the weight of entire planets about to collapse? When he reached close to her, his muscular legs failed like cracking marble columns, and he let himself fall into the leather armchair like a rag doll abandoned by God, his face buried in calloused hands that had once held millions of dreams and nightmares. "Because," he began, his voice breaking like crystal being shattered by a hammer, each word torn from his throat as if he were spitting emotional blood. "Because I was afraid, Ayesha. Afraid that you would see who I really was beneath all this golden mask of lies. Afraid that you would discover you had married a pathetic imposter. A ghost pretending to be a man." Can you physically feel how these words came out of his throat like razors cutting living flesh? How each confession was torn from his chest as if he were being flayed alive by his own internal demons? Ayesha approached him as if she were a divine apparition floating over holy water, still holding the letter like a cursed talisman that burned between her fingers. "Did you really think I would love you less for knowing you were human? That you had bleeding fears, torturing doubts, moments of weakness that made you more real?" Her tears fell freely now like sacred rain, each crystalline drop reflecting years of misunderstood and misinterpreted love. "Steph, your vulnerability doesn't make you less of a man. It makes you infinitely more true, more touchable, more lovable." And it was in that devastating moment that something fundamental irreversibly shattered inside him. Can you physically feel how decades of self-condemnation shattered, like a concrete dam breaking under nuclear pressure? Steph slowly raised his face, his eyes red with salty tears meeting hers like two souls recognizing each other after lifetimes of searching. And for the first time in eternal years, she saw the real and raw man behind the manufactured golden legend. "I was ready to give up, baby," he confessed, his voice tremulous like that of a lost child in a dark forest. "That cursed night, before the game against the Clippers, I was ready to abandon everything like a coward, to disappear from your life like smoke, because I thought you deserved something better than a walking failure." Ayesha felt her heart shatter and rebuild simultaneously. as if it were being demolished and resurrected in the same instant. Can you imagine the devastating irony of this revelation? The game that marked the beginning of Steph's legendary transformation had been preceded by the night he almost gave up existing. "But you didn't give up," she whispered like a prayer whispered to angels, kneeling in front of him like a devotee and holding his face between her hands as she had done thousands of times, but now with a meaning that transcended dimensions. "You fought like a possessed gladiator. You won like a basketball god. You became everything I always knew you could be." "No," Steph shook his head violently, as if trying to expel demons from his mind. "I became this because I was desperate to deserve you." Each accurate shot after that night was a bloody promise, a sacred promise that I would never again be the weak and pathetic man who wrote that farewell letter. Can you feel how this revelation resignified 15 entire years of glories? How each golden championship, each record broken like glass, each moment of world greatness had been built on the foundation of a love so deep and desperate that it transformed terror into divinity? Ayesha pulled him into her arms like a mother embracing a son who returned from the dead, and for the first time in eternal years, Steph allowed himself to be truly vulnerable, stripped of all armor. "Do you want to know a secret that will blow your mind?" she whispered against his ear, her warm breath creating shivers that descended his spine like electric currents of pure intimacy. "I always knew." Steph pulled away, as if he had received an electric shock, his eyes wide, with total shock. "What?" "Not about the gambling, not about the bleeding details," she explained, her hands tracing the contour of the face she loved, as if she were sculpting a divine work of art. "But I knew you carried something heavy as molten lead. I saw it in your sleepless nights when you looked at the ceiling as if you were seeing ghosts, in the way you sometimes looked at me as if you were saying goodbye forever. I just respected your sacred right to tell me when your soul was ready." Can you feel how these words exploded in his mind like divine revelations descending from heaven? During all these torturous years, while he martyred himself, keeping secrets like thorns in his heart, Ayesha had been patient like a saint, knowing that true love doesn't force confessions. It waits until they naturally sprout like flowers at the right time. "And my career?" he asked, vulnerable like a newborn exposed to the cruel world. "Did you really pause your golden dreams for me like a martyr?" Ayesha smiled, that radiant smile that had conquered his heart from the first meeting, and which now shone like a sun rising after the darkest night. "Steph, you didn't pause my dreams. You transformed them into something bigger than I ever imagined. Being your wife, creating our family like a sacred garden, supporting your epic journey. This was also my deepest dream. It wasn't bloody sacrifice. It was conscious choice. A choice I would make 1,000 times if the universe gave me the chance." It was then that she had an idea that would change everything forever, as if angels had whispered in her ear. "Come with me," she said, taking his hand as if she were guiding him to a sacred ritual and leading him to the fireplace on the ground floor. The California afternoon was cooling like soft longing, and she lit the fire with ritual and hypnotic movements, the flames dancing like ancestral spirits celebrating a rebirth. "What are you doing?" Steph asked, confused like a child observing magic. "We're going to burn this cursed letter," she declared, like a priestess pronouncing a divine decree, holding the yellowed paper over the hungry flames that licked the air like dragon tongues. Not to destroy the past like cowards, but to honor it like warriors. That vulnerable Steph from 2014 deserves sacred recognition, not shame. He was brave enough to love even thinking he didn't deserve to be loved. And that courage deserves to be celebrated, not buried. Can you visualize the crystalline tears in both their eyes when the flames began to lick the edges of the paper like fire kisses? But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of total liberation, sacred acceptance, love finally complete and without protective masks. Together, like two hearts beating in unison, they released the letter. The words of pain and self-doubt transformed into golden smoke that rose through the chimney like prayers of gratitude being delivered directly to heaven. Can you feel how that moment symbolized not the cowardly destruction of the past, but its sacred integration into the present? How each burned word became pure freedom. It was when they heard the familiar and angelic sound of the door opening and small steps running through the hallway like celestial music. "Mommy! Daddy!" Riley, Cannon, and Ryan appeared like small hurricanes of pure energy, stopping abruptly when they saw their parents embraced in front of the fireplace like two souls, finally reunited, tears shining on their faces like liquid diamonds reflecting the golden light of the fire. "Why are you crying?" Riley asked, her small voice charged with innocent concern that made both parents' hearts melt instantly. Ayesha and Steph looked at each other, and for the first time in 15 years of marriage, both knew exactly what to say, as if the universe had whispered the right words in their ears. "Sometimes we cry when we're very, very happy, baby," Ayesha explained like a fairy telling a magical tale, pulling the children into a family embrace that included Cash, who appeared wagging his tail as if he understood that something deeply important and sacred had happened in that house. Steph stood up like a reborn man and walked to the framed photo of young Davidson College that he had brought from the office, like a sacred relic. With divine reverence, he placed it in a place of honor on the center table, where everyone could see it and honor it. "This guy is also part of our family," he said, his voice charged with a peace he hadn't felt in years, a serenity you can almost touch. He was very brave and deserves to be remembered and loved. The children looked confused but fascinated, but Ayesha understood perfectly. Can you feel how that gesture symbolized total and absolute acceptance of all aspects of who Steph had been and become? How he finally embraced his complete journey? When the children dispersed to play like small innocent angels, Ayesha and Steph were alone again, but now the silence between them was golden like honey, warm like divine embrace, complete like perfect circle. "No more secrets?" she asked, intertwining her fingers with his like two souls uniting forever. "No more secrets," he promised like a sacred oath, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that carried 15 years of love and now, finally, total crystalline transparency. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace like an intimate symphony. The letters ashes long, gone, transformed into something infinitely greater than words. Divine understanding, sacred forgiveness, and a love that had survived not despite the truth, but because of it. Outside, the California sun began to set like a golden god saying goodbye, painting the sky in tones of liquid gold and crystalline pink that filtered through the windows and bathed the reunited family in angelic light. Can you feel how this final image encapsulates the complete and epic journey? From devastating discovery to sacred reconciliation, from golden lies to liberating truth that made them more human, more real, more lovable. Ayesha looked at her husband, no longer the perfect idol she had placed on a marble pedestal, but the real, complex, vulnerable, and infinitely more lovable man who had chosen to share every beat of his heart with her. And for the first time in 15 years of marriage, she knew him completely, every shadow and every light. The secrets we keep to protect those we love, she realized like a divine revelation, are sometimes exactly what they need to know to love us completely. And in the end, true love isn't about being perfect like marble statues. It's about being real, vulnerable, and brave enough to allow someone to love us not despite our bleeding flaws, but including and embracing each one of them as sacred parts of who we are. The letter had been burned, transformed into smoke and freedom, but the love that survived the ashes was stronger, more true, more sacred than any golden fantasy of perfection. It was real love. And that, you can feel, is infinitely more powerful than any illusion.